Good afternoon, everybody. So I'd like to introduce our next speaker. So today we have Jeremy Nielsen, and he is going to do Red Team Madness, or how he learned to stop worrying about pentesters and their mistakes.
Woo! All right. All of a sudden, a bunch of last-minute folks coming in, but thanks, you guys, for coming today. Spending your post-lunch coma with me. I will no doubt exceed the expectations of letting you sleep through for the next hour. But thanks for coming out to ConVerge, right? This is the third year for ConVerge. It's the 6th year for B-Sides Detroit. This is Detroit's premier security conference, in case you haven't heard that repeated over and over. But if you see Kate or Dan Falk, Wolfgang Gorelick, Ryan Harp, anybody wearing a red shirt, be sure to give them a great big hug, make it awkward, and let them know that you appreciate the hard work that they put in, because it really wouldn't have been possible without all the help. But before we get started in talking about how I stopped worrying and expecting pen tester mistakes, let me ask a couple questions to the audience. Who here is a blue team member? Who in the audience gets paid to defend corporate networks? There's dozens of us. All right. Dozens. And where are my red team guys at? Who's getting paid to attack my networks? Okay, good. So I'm going to tell the majority, the last time I gave this presentation, there was an entire platoon of folks, and they might want to go watch somewhere else. We're going to make fun of red team folks a little bit. Last question, who here has heard the adage that defenders have to be right 100% of the time, attackers only have to be right once? It's pretty common, we keep hearing this over and over. And today I'm going to share with you the TTPs and the IOCs so you can expect and detect those pen tester mistakes, and that way you can win on these engagements. So before we get into all that, who am I? Some of you in the audience know me, and for that I apologize. You guys suffer. For those of you who don't, I'm the ever-lovable Jeremy Nielsen, a longtime MySec member. I've been coming to MySec meetings since 2012. I guess it makes me an old hat around here. But a lot of you may know me best for my trolling on Twitter and on IRC. But I love security operations. I love digging into the packets. I love watching TCP dump. I love watching my IDS alerts and my SIM alerts. There's a lot of stuff going on there. There's a lot of great information. I really love digging into it. And inevitably, when I'm looking at a screen like this, somebody's got to walk by and make the comment that it looks a lot like the Matrix, right? And I don't even see the code anymore. I just see blonde, brunette, redhead, APT1, China, Russia. But when I'm going through and doing my threat hunting, and I'm digging through the IDS alerts and trying to figure out what's going on my network, I tend to feel like this guy, right? Nazgul, hunting for his prey. I feel like a real badass, right? I'm digging in there, I'm knowing what's going on, I'm chasing down those people who are breaking the policies. It's really kind of cool. Yeah, it's exciting. My teams may tell you I'm a little bit more like this guy, right? The Gordon Ramsay of security operations. I'm yelling at them for, messing up how they're responding to malware or something's not going right. And I don't know that I deserve this, but I did make a guy cry once. I don't see him in the audience. Yeah, just one guy cry. I asked him to come in and stop surfing Facebook so much. But the view of blue team, the view of security operations that I hate the most is the view of when a red team guy comes in and says, yeah, I spent 5 minutes on your network, I pop domain admin, drops the 50-page report, mic drops and walks out, right? And gives the view that the blue team guys were just standing there like Walmart greeters saying, hi, welcome to our network. Please don't steal anything. And you know those Walmart greeters, right? You're always trying to leave and they want to look what's inside your packets. So I hate that view. But the entire impetus for this presentation all started with a phone call that our service desk received on a Monday morning. An executive's admin assistant called up the service desk and said, hey, my phone's not working. Would you guys mind coming up and seeing what's going on? And anybody that's worked in any size of an organization knows you do whatever you can for the executive admins, right? They've got the ear of the people that matter, and they know what's going on. They know who's doing the right thing. So of course the service desk monkey goes, running on up there. He wants to earn his brownie points. He gets digging around under the admin's desk, and admins have these huge phone systems. They have these multi-line consoles. They have these additional dial pads, and there's cables going everywhere, right? Service desk guys looking around under the desk and kind of weeding through the cables and trying to figure out what's going on. You can't make heads or tails of it, but something looks unplugged. And if a cable's unplugged, that's a network team job, right? Network cables, network guy. So a network guy goes up there to plug in the cable. He's rooting around. After a couple of minutes, he calls up the security operations center. He calls up the SOC and says, hey guys, on this phone issue, yeah, there's a device that looks like it's plugged into the network, and it's not one of ours. So our incident response plan looks a little something like this. That's a little slow, I apologize for that, but everybody's running around with their hair on fire and, oh my gosh, what's going on? Is this an incident? Is it a pen test? What's going on? Oh my gosh, we got to know what's going on. Everybody's lit up. So we send a security operations guy up there to take a look, and in his best wisdom, unplugs the device, unplugs it from the network, and brings it back down. Probably shouldn't have done that, but it is what it is, right? So we're looking this thing over. We're not quite sure what it is. This is exactly what the device looked like. So we're looking it over, just trying to figure out what the heck it is. We're looking for some sort of asset ID, trying to make sure if it's one of ours. We're looking for some sort of stickers. We're thinking that it might be one of these, or we're looking for a logo letting us know it's a Pony Express, maybe a fresh sticker. But we're not seeing anything, right? It turns out, as we dig into this, it's an Intel NUC. It's some new unit of computing. It's this micro form factor PC. You had some laptop memory. You had a hard drive. It had a couple of dongles for additional network adapters and a GSM modem, right? But as we're digging through this thing, we're like, well, it's got a hard drive. What's on the hard drive? What's in the box? What's in the box? So one of our SOC analysts used to be a service desk monkey. He had a few adapters, managed to get one of those. We can mount the drive. It's got a funky adapter on it. We mount the drive and we find out, sure enough, it's not encrypted. You drop a box behind enemy lines and you don't encrypt the data? Okay, fine. So we're digging through this thing. And right away we find identifying information all over this thing. It let us know that this was the Pentester's box. We recognized the name of the company. It was somebody that we were expecting business with. And so that lowered the threat level right away. Okay, we know this is not an incident. This is just a pen test of some sort. Threat level reduced. We're digging around. We've got all their tools. We've got access to all the code that they're using, which is great for us because then that gives us a plethora to play with later. But we've also got their logs. We've got bash history. So we're digging through the bash history file and seeing all the commands that they're running through. And we managed to see that they're trying to troubleshoot their network connection. Okay, they're running NAC bypass scripts and running some NAC tools. They obviously did not get onto our network. We see it in the logs, we see it in the bash history. They're trying to figure out what's going on. Around 3 a.m. they gave up. And then, of course, the next morning, the executive admin finds her phone's not working because they had plugged into one of the dial pads instead of actually into the network. As we're digging through the logs in bash history, we also noticed that they were communicating back to a command and control host. And they were clever. They weren't using passwords, right? They were using SSH keys that they managed to leave on the box. Now, what happens next is a bit contentious. We're not entirely sure what happened. But somewhere the next morning, the guy who sets up our pen test engagements gets some secure text messages from the pen testers saying their command and control host, which is also their mail server, was completely bombed. They have no idea what happened. They're not able to get the thing booted. They have no IP addresses. They have no information at all. But something went wrong, and it's obviously our fault, right? I love this adapter. Woo! I love it. Did I mention this was Detroit's premier security conference? All right. So the pen testers were pissed, right? And I got to say that I can't blame them, right? I mean, they're there to test our security. They're there to pwn us. They're not there to be the models of security. I mean, he was absolutely ticked off. They just couldn't wrap their mind around the fact that they had been owned, that they had totally lost control of the engagement, and so they ended up storming off the engagement. They rage quit. They were like, "We're out of here. We're done." The lead guy had enough. It was unrecoverable, right? So I can't say that I blame them. You know, they lost unencrypted, sensitive data behind enemy lines. They didn't segment their trusted and untrusted networks, so they were communicating with a box that was part of the production network. They had allegedly had their credentials stolen and used against them. You know, they had no detection for an incident occurring on their network. They had no incident response capabilities of their own. And their box stopped working, and they were unable to proceed with their pen test, right? So I don't blame them for being pissed off. You know, in the end, nobody ended up fessing up to owning the pen testers. They had no logs, no IP address, nothing to show what happened. So the last time I gave this presentation, the platoon of pen testers in the back were like, "Oh, no, you didn't. How dare you?" And in fact, there was a comment on the YouTube video on Iron Geek's site, where, Company B unlawfully hacks legit Company A's machines. Of course they walked off the pen test. Duh. Well, that's not the point of this, right? And while this entire presentation is a vehicle for me to be able to share this story and really make fun of these pen testers, the real point that I'm trying to drive across is that on my first pen test engagement, I learned that we don't have to be right 100% of the times, and the pen testers only have to be right once. They have to be right a lot as well. They're going to make mistakes, and we can expect them, we can detect them, and then we can win on these engagements, right? And that's the point. It's not about the reverse hacking. It's about detecting the pen testers and you guys coming out as the blue team members with a positive light after the engagement. So I'm going to share 4 simple use cases with you guys so that you guys can help detect pen testers on your network. First, we're going to talk about detecting the common tools that pen testers are using. This is actually really great. There's going to be a lot of IOCs in there that you can use. We're going to talk briefly about detecting rogue machines on your network. We're going to talk about detecting pass-the-hash attacks, not just because pen testers use those, but it's a common lateral movement from any type of attacker. We're going to talk briefly about detecting brute force attacks because it's rather boring. And we're going to wrap up with talking about what do you do once you find pen testers on your network? How do you do incident response there? So for each one of those, Ren and Stimpy had a song, right? What rolls downstairs, the loner in pairs rolls over the neighbor's dog. It's logs, 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 right? Every use case is going to depend on logs. We're going to call these our dependencies. You've got a lot of great information on your network. If you're not pulling in logs and looking at them regularly, you're missing out on a treasure trove of data that's going to help you better defend your networks. And of course, it's really hard to use all those terabytes of logs unless you've got some sort of SIM, right? Have a log aggregator, pull in those logs into a centralized system, have a tool that allows you to write simple alerts. So when these things pop up, you can get alerted rather immediately, rather than having to find out when you get a pen tester report a week later. I'm a little partial to ArcSight. It is, and you need a Whopper class machine in order to run it. But once you got it up and running, it's fantastic. So anybody who wants to talk ArcSight with me afterwards, come find me. I love that tool. But I think a big takeaway from this isn't just taking away the IOCs that I have here, because eventually you're going to get to a pen test where these techniques are no longer valid. The IOCs are no longer valid. So keep up with Red Team presentations on Iron Geek's site. Look at the tools and techniques that are being developed. Figure out how they work. Figure out how you can use them on your network. Practice with them. Look at the Red Team reports that are being delivered to you and ask the Red Team members, don't make fun of them and don't do it after you've hacked back on their machines, but work with them to understand how the attack works and how you can recreate that attack that they used on your network. look at the logs, look what gets generated and what you can alert on later on. Because this will get you so far. There's a lot of gimmicky stuff in here, and it's only going to get you so far. So continue to learn, continue to hunt for new ways that you're going to be exploited. And then my slides are not actually going to be online, and I actually forgot to bring the handouts with me. So I will post the actual IOCs. You guys don't need to furiously write all this information down, but we will post the slides or the IOCs that you want to use online someplace. So we might as well get right into it, right? Pen testers love their tools. They really love their tools. It makes for a repeatable process, right? That they can go from client to client and they can reuse a lot of the same code, a lot of the same techniques. And this also gets pivoted because more of the unscrupulous companies can become pen test puppy mills. We never secure our networks. We're all vulnerable to MS-08, 067, or whatever the harbinger of the day is. We don't defend our networks adequately. We don't patch those vulnerabilities. And so they, sure enough, have the right tools to exploit that. And then they can script that for a junior pen tester, send them out, drop the 20-page report, and they're done, making boatloads of money. For this use case, you're going to want to have proxy logs. Proxy logs are invaluable just normally. If your proxy doesn't provide security-relevant categorization, letting you know about malicious outbound sources or hacking computer security categories, you can use those to build rules around, look for the categories being popped in there. But you got to have some sort of proxy logs. If you don't have any type of proxy log, shame on you. I recommend Blue Coat, but you can at least pull DNS logs. And if you're not getting proxy logs, you have to do DNS logs. I'm sorry if you got Windows DNS servers. Your admins are going to complain that it's a resource hog and it's chewing up resources. Turn on debug, pull those into your SIM. You got to do it. There's a lot of great information there. So probably the tool that pen testers use most, I think every pen tester is going to have touched Kali and Backtrack at some point in time. It's universal, right? The tools are already pre-installed. They work out of the box. They don't have to mess with it. There's no muss, no fuss. So it's not surprising that you're going to find this on your network. And Kali's got this slogan, right? The quieter you become, the more you're able to hear. And I find this really funny because Kali Linux by itself is actually very noisy. So Kali Linux is really noisy during installation. So when you're installing this in a VM, you're installing this on a hard drive, it's making all sorts of calls out. After the first boot, it's making calls out to check for updates. Anytime you install a new tool, anytime you do apt-get update, it's making calls out, right? Let's not forget that Kali 2.0 implemented automatic updates. So on a weekly basis, it's going to be calling out and looking for updates. Now it's worth noting at this point that the live CD doesn't appear to actually check for updates. So if your pen testers are going live, it's less likely you're going to find them through these methods. There's other ways, but not this way. So needless to say, if your pen testers are seeing this on their machine and they're on my network, I've detected them, right? DNS and HTTP logs, proxy logs and DNS logs. So what we're looking for are just 3 IOCs here, right? You're looking for calls out to http.kali.org, security.kali.org, and archive is some number. I usually see archive-4.kali.org, but you may see a number between 1 and 9. So look for calls out to this. Somebody can go to www.kali.org and not trigger your rule, but any apt-get, any installation, anything that gets updated pulls directly from these repositories. So look for calls out to those. That's going to be your harbinger of death. Now, I also found that during the installation of Kali, it asks you to select the time zone. And once you selected what time zone you're in, it made a call out to debian.pool.ntp.org. Now, if you got a lot of Debian on your network, that might be a big false positive. But if you've got a primarily Windows network, keep an eye out for that. That shouldn't be there. One thing that shouldn't be there, unless you're running, unless you're building network cards, there's a weekly update after the first boot, about a half an hour after the first boot, and then weekly after that. There's some app that gets the Mac OUI database, so you can identify, probably through AirCrack or something, what the network card is that you're dealing with. So it downloads this like 40 meg file of all the Mac OUIs from standards.ieee.org. That's going to be rare on your network. Look for that. It happens regularly. Pen testers don't turn that stuff off. They're going to come on your network. They're going to think, oh, I've got it pre-installed. But then, middle of the week, it's going to update the Mac OUI database, and you're going to find them. Now, some pen testers use Metasploit. A lot of the more junior pen testers use Metasploit. Some of the older ones, that's for script kiddies, right? But at some point, I think we all use Metasploit on the network. Perhaps somebody who's breaking or violating some sort of policy might be trying to use Metasploit. Metasploit doesn't update when you run it, but every guide that I look at, from Offensive Security's Metasploit guide all the way to the Hacker Playbook, always says before you run MSF console, run MSF update. And who's going to avoid guidance like that, right? So in Kali Linux, when you update Metasploit, it pulls from the repository at http.kali.org. So there's a sub-URI that's specific to Metasploit. You can look that up, but if you're just looking for http.kali.org, you're going to be fine. Other versions, I think like Samurai WTF and other installations, actually pull directly from updates.metasploit.com. So take a look at both of those, and you'll find those guys when they pop on your network. Now, I love web application assessments. I love digging into how a web application works and getting to toy around with the actual requests that are going in there. When you open up Burp Suite on Kali for the first time, even if you tell it don't send anonymous usage statistics, it makes connections out to perfdata.portswigger.net and pro.portswigger.net. Every time that you open it up afterwards, it's making calls out to portswigger.net, and I see this IP address on there. During my testing, it didn't actually make a DNS call before it started going to that IP address. It may be hard-coded in there, or maybe I just screwed something up with my DNS cache. Either way, that may change in the future, but it might be a good indicator. They're hosting that at Amazon AWS. Just keep an eye out for it. But if somebody's loading up Burp Suite, it's checking for updates. And in their developer forums, pen testers have asked them, we need the ability to turn this off. And the developers are like, okay, thanks, bye. They're not going to do anything about it. So look for it, because that's never going to change. Look for portswigger.net on your network. Now, since we're talking about web application assessments, I also like Nikto. Nikto gives me some basic information about the web servers that I'm looking at. It doesn't update automatically. You have to force it, but who doesn't, right? So you might as well look for www.cert.net. Now, when you look at that in your logs, my first inclination is that some sort of computer incident response team, maybe US CERT or Carnegie Mellon CERT, right? Maybe just because I'm lame. But take a look at it, right? If you see calls out to that, it probably shouldn't be there. And since you're looking for Nikto anyway, look for user agent strings that contain the word Nikto. Now, you're not going to be able to do anything when somebody's attacking your external website, and you're seeing that in there, but if you see this stuff sourced internally, somebody's doing something that they shouldn't, right? So just keep an eye out for it. But a tool you're more likely to see on a pen test is Meltigo. Meltigo is great, right? Gives me the ability, or gives the pen testers the ability to gather OSINT, to pull together a lot of information on an organization, to display it, to be able to use that to help and aid in their exploitations. So in Kali Linux, when you open up Meltigo for the first time, you get the standard, hi, welcome to Meltigo screen. When you get to this screen, you've already transmitted 1,500 packets to perturba.com on my network. By the time that you get to the end of the setup screen, you've communicated 30,000 packets to Perturba on my network. So there's a lot of great stuff in there that you can use to detect them if somebody's using Meltigo on your network. And then after one of my presentations, somebody asked about Core Impact. I've never seen Core Impact used, but I understand there are some teams that will use this for doing vulnerability assessments. So just in case one of those companies, like a local Detroit company, is using Core Security on your network, just look for updates coming from impact.coresecurity.com. So I've given you a lot of gimmicky, basic tools that pen testers are using and ways to detect that. But think a little bit broader. Think about the tools that pen testers need to do their jobs. Pen testers are just like the rest of us. They need food, they need water, they need hugs. they also have to file their TPS reports. They have to file their timesheets. They need to check mail and understand what's going on at the back of the office. They need to get yelled at by the boss, right? So they probably got to connect to a VPN someplace. They probably got to connect to webmail, OWA. They've got some mail.something that they're checking into. So if you know what company your pen testers come from, if you know what company your boss is going to be outsourcing to, whether it's Rapid7 or whoever it is, do a little bit of reconnaissance on them before the engagement and set up rules. Look for their mail. For example, Rapid7, not to call them out, but on an engagement, their mail or their VPN servers are Mario and Luigi.rapid7.com, and then they've got some script that was running on our network. But look for weird things going back to weird Rapid7.com sites, right? All right. Let's talk about detecting rogue machines on a network. You got pen testers that are on an engagement, and they're coming in and dropping off boxes like they were trying to do it at their engagement with us. You're going to find that there's going to be boxes dropped off on your network that you don't know about, and they're trying to hide, and you're going to want to detect those as early as possible. So during another pen test engagement, we had folks that were sitting on our network. We detected them early on because we detected Metasploit and Kelly be calling out. I mean, right on the first day, we detected these guys early on. So we knew it was pen testers. We knew what was going on. We ignored the alerts that were being generated. We just let them do what they wanted because we wanted to work with them, right? We wanted to understand what our vulnerabilities are. So we just let them run and have fun. And being the excited and exhilarating guy that I am, I spend my Saturdays threat hunting. I go digging through the SIM. I look through active channels on ArcSight and see what's going on. And that weekend, I wanted to see, we haven't been keeping track of these pen testers. What were they doing on the network? And we had some alerts, we had some IP addresses, but it looked like they were changing their IP addresses. And how do you keep track of pen testers who are changing their IP addresses? So after a little bit of thought, it became obvious. It was likely they were changing their IP addresses, but not their MAC address, right? So for this use case, you're going to want to pull your DHCP logs and you're going to want to pull your DNS logs. You're going to want to get the host names out of the DNS logs that were making requests, and you want to get the host names out of DHCP logs as well as the MAC addresses. It's going to be a bit of a pain in the butt, but this is kind of an easy win here, guys. Now, as I'm digging through and trying to find the pen testers, I started with a known IP address. Managed to see these guys were using VMware. And then when I started digging through some of the other IP addresses that were being used, I saw another MAC address. Sure enough, I pull up a list of virtualization MAC addresses online. So I created a rule for that, went through and started digging through the old alerts and managed to see all the times that they were changing their IP addresses. Suddenly I had a trail that I can go from. Their host name and their IP address. When they would change their host name, not a big deal. When they changed their IP address, not a big deal. Now I have a trail to go with because I was looking for the MAC addresses. Now, it's easy enough to get a new address, right? DH client ETH0 on Linux, right? ipconfig/release renew on Windows. And it's pretty easy to change a MAC address in VMware. You just go into the options, right? But pen testers don't seem to do this. And since you're looking for MAC addresses, you might as well look for a joker as well. So what I ended up finding as I was digging through the MAC addresses was actually, we had one guy that was using VMware, we had the other guy that was using VirtualHost, or VirtualBox. And as I'm going through and diagramming out where they were going, what they were hitting, it became obvious this was two separate people. And I think it was the older guy that was using VirtualBox. But as I'm explaining this to the rest of the team, it became easier just to refer to these guys as thing one and thing two, right? So attribution sucks when you're trying to figure out whether it's China or Russia, and it's pretty useless. But at least for understanding what's going on the inside of your network, attribution is actually a pretty reasonable thing. So if you can identify and separate out different actors on your network, do it. And since you're already looking at MAC addresses and you've got a list of host names, why not take it one step further, right? Monitor all the MAC addresses on your network. Look for new things that are popping up. Look for new hosts that shouldn't be there. Now, we all work in large organizations. Everybody comes in every day. You've got 1,500 new, discover and request, and you've got all sorts of DHCP logs that are coming in. You're going to think it's impossible to do. start with your standard naming conventions. Start with the things that you know are good, right? When you're not being attacked, when things are low, start looking at what's supposed to be there, what commonly shows up, right? Look at your standard naming convention. Look at the things that follow whatever it is that you use. All of our companies use standard naming conventions because it makes it easier for service desk folks. But it makes it easy for us too. So if you see things that stand out, right? If you see iPhone, if you see Android, see some weird printer address in there, right? If you see some vendor, KPMG's on your network or VialPoint's on your network and they're showing up as vialpoint.com. And then maybe you'll find that somebody's got Kali.local domain because they didn't change VMware's DHCP settings to set a different host name. And if you've got a box that you're not quite sure about, it looks like it meets your naming standard, but maybe it's a little bit different, use PS Login, right? You can, of course, go into Active Directory, Losers and Computers, and try and find the computer name, and you're going to stumble around searching for this thing. No, just from your computer. Reach out with PS Login, go whack, whatever the computer name is, and even your standard non-privileged user credential should be able to query SMB on the box. If you don't see your user ID reflected back to you, it's probably not part of your domain. If it's not part of your domain, what's it doing there? Gives you a way to investigate, let you know if something's valid or not. Now, after the last time I gave this presentation, a red team guy had made the suggestion that if it's potentially harmful, if it's potentially malicious, do you want to send your credentials to this box? Maybe not, right? So if you're going to try this, be careful. Do it when it's not in the middle of an incident. Do it when there's not the likelihood of having somebody have a potentially bad box here. And in any case, have a canary account, right? Have a token account that you can set up, that you've got an alert on elsewhere, that this thing shouldn't be used very often. And when it does, it lets you guys know. So if somebody's capturing that credential, somebody's capturing that NTLM handshake and cracking the password, and reusing that throughout the network, you can detect them. So be careful, but there's ways around it. So let's talk about detecting pass-the-hash attacks. Pass-the-hash attacks are pretty common. There's a variety of credential attacks, right? Active Directory attacks. We've got pass-the-ticket, we've got golden ticket, silver ticket, we've got Kerberos, right? Pentesters love using Mimikatz and Windows Credential Editor, and there's a lot of good credential attacks out there that you can read up on. But I think pass-the-hash attack is common enough and something that you can actually detect and spend some time preventing if you just turn off NTLM. We never turn off NTLM, so it's better that we can detect these attacks when they're attempted or successful. And the way this works is, Pentester's got a basic foothold in your network. I see Hinge back there. I learned some of this from him from a couple years ago. But they get the basic foothold in the network, and they're going to look around, dumping credentials, hoping that somebody's logged into a box with domain admin credentials or some sort of elevated privileges that they can then use to pivot elsewhere on the network or maybe get into your domain controller and start taking control of more stuff. The dependencies here, you're going to want to gather Windows security logs from as many machines as you possibly can. I am not an advocate for log all the things. I think that's a waste of time. I think that's a waste of space. But Windows security logs, you're going to want to get as many of these as possible. And if you have limited space, if you have limited EPS on your SIM, at least get a representative sample, at least focus on your critical machines, but pull in those Windows security logs. Now, pass-the-hash is an easy attack for these guys to rock out. They get access to a machine, they dump the SAM, they get a hash, and then they can replay that hash using something like PSExec, or there's tools in Metasploit that they're going to reuse that hash and bounce from server to server. I've seen it used where on one of the pen tests, they were remotely starting PowerShell with a base64 encoded payload that was launching a reverse shell connecting back. So they were going around the network rather than pivoting around the network. They were just popping box after box and having to connect back to a central management server that they could use at a later time. Now, if you don't know how pass-the-hash works, there's several guides out there that talk about handling and detecting pass-the-hash. So if you need some background, start with Microsoft's guide on mitigating pass-the-hash. It's a pretty good guide, and it gets a little technical. It's very limited. The NSA also has their guide on reducing the effectiveness of pass-the-hash attacks. Again, it's okay, what I really like, I think every pen test, every blue team should have a copy of this printed out, distributed around your network, have it on your bedside table, have it in the toilet, wherever you go. I love this guide. Spotting the adversary with Windows Event Log Monitoring. It's not just focusing on pass the hash attacks. It's looking at all sorts of credential attacks and other attacks going on a Windows domain, and how you can detect those and things that you can set up. It's very vendor neutral, so it's just showing you from the Windows log point of view what's going to trigger when certain attacks go off. So again, I see people taking notes, so I'm leaving it up there for a moment. Now specifically, for pass the hash attacks, you're going to be looking for events like this. Now I know this is an eye chart. You guys aren't able to see this, so we'll blow this up here in a moment. But every attack, because we don't turn off NTLM, every pass the hash attack starts off as event ID 4624. 4624 are successful logins. You could also look for 4625s. In my case, I had a lot of false positives for that for some reason, for some legacy apps. You can look for 4624 and 4625. These things are network logins, right? They're not interactive. They're network-based. It's all SMB, NTLM authentication. So you're going to look for login type 3. You're going to look for the account name being not null. Now, it's 2016. Since as far back as the year 2000, everybody's been told to turn off null sessions in their Windows domains. Some people do, some people don't. You're likely to see, if you haven't turned off null sessions, a lot of NTLM null sessions going on in your network. You can weed those out, or you can turn it off, but at least when you're detecting for pass the hash, the account name's not going to be empty. So look for something that's in there. In fact, during some of the attacks that I've seen in my logging system, the account name has actually been really weird. It's not actual, it was like random letters is what was popping up. It may have just been ArcSight screwing something up, but. And then lastly, you're going to look for authentication package NTLM. The alternative here is Kerberos, and it's not a Kerberos attack, it's an NTLM attack. We can just mitigate this if we all turned off NTLM, and we know that executives don't want to bring down the network, and everybody, there's that guy who sits in the corner, and we can't turn off NTLM because it might break something, and we just don't want to do that, right? But turn off NTLM, it never breaks anything. So if you're building a rule in ArcSight, that's just what the rule looks like. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And once you got the rule set up, the pen testers start popping around the network. If you're getting logs from a particular device, this thing's going to light up like a Christmas tree. You're going to get a whole lot of alerts. You're going to find out where these guys are at and chase them down. Let's talk briefly about detecting brute force attacks. This is a common headache on networks. A lot of SIM tools come with pre-installed rules. Inevitably, one of them is some, port scan attack on my external interface. I was speaking with a gentleman at an auto supplier. Their MSSP was sending them critical alerts, and he showed me a bunch of the critical alerts. And one of the critical alerts was, external port scan, critical alert, deal with this now. You can't do anything with that. I mean, that was a waste of freaking time. So everybody, with a reasonable amount of sense, turns that off, right? They turn off the rules for port scans, and there's nothing that they could do about it. There are good things that you could do with this. The dependencies for this use case are going to be firewall logs. You're like pulling all your firewall logs anyway, right? Pull in your firewall logs, pull in your Windows security logs. It's going to show you the user logins. And pull in your Linux sys log. And that should let you know about the users trying to log into your system as well. Pull it in from as many devices as you possibly can manage. So I break this down into there's 4 basic types of brute force attacks. Now, I mean, you can break these out into subcategories, and in the end, you could probably end up with like 30 or 40 of these. But I break it down into 4 basic brute force use cases. The first is username guessing, right? When you've got the same source, trying different usernames, they're probably using the same password, right? They're searching for a foothold. You're going to want to pay attention to the usernames that are being guessed. Are these things legitimate? Do they actually exist on your network, or are they just going through msan, nsan, osan, lsmith, msmith, nsmith? Are they using common ones, or are they just guessing? They're probably looking with easy passwords. I worked at a large pizza company where pizza123 was not uncommon to find as a default password. But your organization probably isn't too different, right? We're no longer in spring. People probably changed their passwords, or the service desk is giving new passwords as summer 2016. And maybe there's a list out there that somebody's running through with compromised credentials. So there's a lot of good information that can be seen from an alert like this. In a lot of organizations, you're going to get overran with a lot of brute force attacks, but if somebody's going through different usernames from the same source, that's a bit odd, right? So take a look at that. Quite a bit more common, and quite a bit more false positives come from somebody from the same source with the same username, right? It's a common type of brute force attack, but this is also a lot of your stupid users. I don't mean to call the user stupid, but you got the guy who can't remember his password 3 days later. Comes back from a vacation and needs to have his password reset, right? So he's going to be the one that's popping these alerts most of the time. But keep an eye out for it anyway, because it's going to be the pen tester who's trying to get in, who's blending in with all the other stupid users. Now, I'll have people that disagree with me that port scan isn't really a brute force attack. We could argue about that later. We can do that over beers tonight or whatever. But when you think about it at its most basic level, you're going through port by port to see what's open and what's closed. You're going host by host to see what's available and where you can move to next, right? You're brute forcing going through every 65,000 ports on a machine to see what's there. Now, as I said earlier, people turn off this rule because they're getting bombarded with the external scans that they can't do anything about. But if somebody's inside your network and port scanning, they probably shouldn't, right? I mean, you'll have the network team that does this, and that's common. You know, you can follow up with them. I would not exclude the network team, but follow up with these things, because they shouldn't be happening daily. They shouldn't even be happening weekly. So turn it on. Look for the internals. If you've got critical machines, definitely be looking for those, right? I worked for, again, a large pizza company that had a lot of PCI data. It makes sense. If somebody's going to try enumerating your PCI range, your segmented PCI zones, that's a bit creepy. So if you've got critical servers, if you've got things that you're sensitive about, at least look there, right? And then a bit different from a port scan is an address scan. This is where somebody's got a particular port that they're looking for. Port 137, and they're looking for the vulnerability there, or they're running an exploit to take advantage of SMB, or they're port 1900 for something with SSDP. But they're blowing through every IP address. They've got that vulnerability lined up. They're just looking for that right target to pop that thing on. And so they're going to go address by address looking for what's vulnerable for it. Your port scan's likely not going to detect this, right? Because it's looking for, on a single IP address, 10 or more hits in 60 seconds or whatever it is. This is a bit different. You're going to look for different IP addresses on a single IP address. Told you we're going to talk about that briefly. I know that was incredibly boring. But once you've found pen testers on your network, right, whether it's you detected the tool on the system, you found their rogue machine, maybe you just figured out that the guys are there. What do you do next, right? Now, before we get any further, typical disclaimer, this usually comes at the beginning of the talk. It's more relevant here. I'm not your manager, right? I'm not going to be able to say, do this and thou shalt not have any consequences, right? And I'm not your mother. I'm not going to wipe up after you. So some of the things here may be illegal, depending on the states that folks come from. Some of these things may put your job in jeopardy. Use your best judgment. So let me start with a story. One day, a SOC analyst is sitting there watching the console, and he gets one of the alerts. He detects a tool. There's a Kelly outbound hit, right? He sees it go out. There's a few of those, and wow, what's going on, right? So he goes to the guy who sets up the pen test engagement, and he goes, we'll call him Ron. Ron, hey, is this you? Is this you doing stuff? And Ron, being the shady kind of guy that he is like, maybe. He gives that little smirk, right? So the SOC analyst takes that as a yes and closes out the alert, doesn't document anything, and goes about his day until about an hour later when more alerts get generated. He goes back to Ron. And Ron, I'm seeing more of these alerts. Is everything all right? Everything good? Oh, yeah, don't worry about it. No, go, just close those out, right? So a little while later, he sees a printer making a call out to Cali.org. That's a little bit weird. So he calls me over, lets me know, hey, I've been seeing these things going on. Of course, I get a little irate. Why weren't we documenting this? Why didn't you let me know sooner? If Ron is doing this, shouldn't we know what they're doing? Shouldn't we be tracking this? The answer is yes. So we dig into it a little bit further. I mean, yeah, it's a little weird that a printer is making a call out to Cali.org. So we go chase down a network guy. Hey, what's this IP address map back to? Okay, it maps back to this IP or this MAC address. That MAC address is on this port. What do you want to do? We're looking around like, shut it down. Sure, why not, right? I mean, they're doing weird stuff. Whatever they're doing isn't supposed to be there. So if Ron is doing some weird stuff, let's shut it down. 5 minutes later, I get called into a conference room where, of course, we got to turn the port back on, and they let me know about the pen test going on, and got to turn the port back on. And as soon as we turn the port back on, 5 minutes later, there's another Cali hit going out. I'm like, okay, can't keep a straight face on this one. That gig's up. But in that story, we had quite a few screw-ups, just from our security operations side, right? Not even talking about the penetration testers and their tools that kept going out and calling out and triggering our alerts. So I want to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly ways of dealing with the pen testers or anybody else once you find them on your network. Now, these are the good things, right? These are the things that you should always be doing, right? Use your incident response plan. That's what it's there for. You've got an incident. The red team members are called in probably to test your incident response plan, not just to find all the cool vulnerabilities on your network. But use the incident response plan that's there. And then once you've engaged that and you've let whoever know, your boss, their boss, whatever your incident response plan says to do, stop the clock. Go to the person who sets up the pen test and say, I found these guys. Because now that changes that conversation from how is the SOC doing to more of a conversation around how can the red team help us get better at detecting or responding to events later on, right? So it's no longer testing you, it's no longer testing your SOC, it's testing the network. Now, as part of your incident response plan, and I don't call this out up here, but you really got to have a few key things, right? Have it tested ahead of time. Have it defined ahead of time. The worst time to be looking for how do you respond to this stuff is in the middle of a crisis. Because you've got 30 things going on, you've got a whole bunch of alerts that you want to investigate, and the last thing you want to do is, oh my gosh, what do I do? Do I turn off the port or do I not turn off the port? Who do I tell? Right? So have a tabletop exercise ahead of time. If you don't have an incident response plan and you haven't run through a tabletop exercise, you should not be doing anonymous or unannounced red team exercises. I mean, just point blank, right? But it happens, and it happens all over the place where people bring in the red team penetration testers. Have somebody that's a defined incident responder who's recording the notes, right? All their job is to define and keep track of everything that was found, all the systems that were touched, everything that collect all the artifacts, keep track of the information. Have somebody else who's assigned as the incident manager. And it doesn't have to be the SOC manager. It doesn't have to be the VP of information security. Have somebody who's going to coordinate and distribute tasks. Because the last thing you want, because everybody's hair is going to be on fire, everybody's running around and, oh my gosh, what's going on? It's an incident. The last thing you want is 50 different people telling your SOC analyst, hey, check this out, and hey, did you think about looking over there? No, all that should come through a single chain of command, right? That should be the incident manager. So have all this stuff defined ahead of time, right? And as part of your incident response plan, you should be tracking down all the machines that were touched. You've got the logs. Hopefully you've got all the logs. Pen testers are hopping through the network, they're pivoting, they're getting credentials. Track all that stuff down, right? Collect all the logs. You may not have all the logs, right? They're going to be touching machines, endpoints. We don't get logs from endpoints. Maybe you use Carbon Black, maybe you don't. Collect as much logs as you can. And for everything else, it's hard on access layer switches, but if you can get a span port and you can put a sniffer on there, nothing's going to be better than seeing the actual packets that are going across the network and letting you know exactly where they went and what they did. Now, going back to the story, one of the bad things that we did was shutting that port down early. It looked like a printer. Printer shouldn't be making calls out. And yeah, it's Ron anyway, right? So it's no big deal. So we'll shut down the port. Except that during an engagement, pen testers can pick up their laptops, walk out the door, and nobody knows where they were, what they were doing. They can go back tomorrow and try again, and we've lost all opportunity to track them through our network. So don't shut down the port before it's necessary to do so, right? Don't unplug devices. 15 years ago, when I was going through training for this, it was told, isolate. Keep this from extending past where they've already gotten to, right? Malware. As soon as malware gets on a box, shut that thing down, right? The wisdom now is we can get memory dumps. We can take forensics image of these things, and that we don't want to tip our hand to an attacker where they change their tactics because we've detected them, and they know that we've detected them, right? So don't unplug devices. You're going to lose a lot of valuable data. And then during that same pen test, the pen testers were pivoting through the network. They were using Metasploit. They got the reverse shells. They managed to tap in to the microphones and the cameras so that they could see what different people were doing. And one of my SOC analysts found that they were doing that on his machine. He got really ticked off. And so at the end of the day, it's like 6 o'clock. He's going around trying to figure out where on the 3rd floor that they were at, trying to figure out what conference room they were in. He was really upset about this thing, right? He was talking about like slashing the tire or leaving some present for these guys in the conference room. So, I mean, I got to warn you, no matter what, don't confront the pen testers. It's not going to lead to anything positive. Nothing good is going to come out of this. But maybe, why not bug them, right? If they're going to listen in through Meterpreter to your conversations, if they're going to hack your email, if they're going to listen in to your phone calls by hacking the VoIP system, or just packet capturing the VoIP system, why not listen into what they're doing? Put a little bug in the conference room where they're at, or figure out where they're at, and start listening into them. Port scan their machine, right? On our networks, we have free reign to run vulnerability scans. That should include the user subnets, right? So scan their machine, see what's open. Kali is a little bit locked down these days. Use their own credentials against them. Why not, right? They're going to use your credentials against you. They're going to use your credentials across the network. How funny would it be to log into their email system and send their boss an email saying, hey, this place sucks. I'm quitting. I'm out of here. I'm gone. Or maybe mimic thousands of hosts across the network. Do port spoofing. Make it harder for them to do their job, right? So be creative and be careful, right? When I got to this point in the presentation before, I must have triggered the platoon of red teamers. You know, they were antsy. The feedback they basically gave me was, why not work with the pen testers? Why not work with them on the engagement? And I mean, in a typical pen test engagement, these guys are adversarial. They're listening into you. They're hacking your machines, right? They're leaving malware. Make it adversarial back, right? So just to recap, I know these things are kind of gimmicky, but we talked about detecting the pen testers' tools. Keep an eye out for Kali.org, security.kali.org. We talked about detecting rogue machines on the network through DHCP logs. We talked about printing off this guide, right? Look for 4624 and 4625 events to detect NTLM pass the hash attacks. We talked briefly about brute force attacks and detecting those. And we talked a little bit about incident response and what you do, the good, the bad, the ugly ways, once you've found them on your network. So with 2 minutes left, any questions? Yes, sir.
Do you get involved in the contract with the pen tester?
In my experience, I have not. So, yeah.
So I mean, you could put it there, like,
Possibly, yeah. I mean, I don't know anybody that's going to agree to. Sure. Now you've got the get out of jail card just as they do, right? Yeah, no, that's a good idea. Fair enough. If it's a box on your network, though, yep. But yeah, exactly. So the question was, how do you know that it's really a pen tester as opposed to a real attacker or just a zombie machine, right? That mail server that was being used for command and control. I mean, we knew about it because, well, I mean, belonging to the pen testing firm that we knew was contracted. So in that case, we get away with it. But yeah, how do you know it's not a zombie machine? How do you hack back or counterattack against a machine that could be a zombie as part of something else? So you got to be careful in that area. But yeah, good question. Yes, sir.
Inside your organization of what they do. I'm going to straight from the red team inside.
Sure. We wanted to do that at the previous organization. We have that where I'm at now. So a lot of those engagements tend to be a bit more of, the more you know type of slide, where these guys are the ones testing the tools and seeing how the attacks work, and then working with us to figure out how we could detect, what rules we could write. And so there's a better relationship there and it's a good idea to have adversarial in that type of a situation as well. They're going to do their things unannounced, and are we detecting it? And what do we do once we detect it, right? So yeah, there's a lot more variety you can do there when you've got a good team internally.
They announce, like, I've been asked to announce it like a high level, but the upper management level start doing something, so that they may or may not warn the people, but they at least they're all to know that we're doing something.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of great benefit that can be had from having internal red teams. And I don't mean this to be disparaging too much to the red teamers, because external penetration testing is very positive and a very important thing to have on your network. But I get tired of the presentations where I've totally pwned the blue team, and oh my gosh, these guys are stupid, and they're idiots, and they don't know what they're doing, and whatever else it is, right? Because we've got a lot going on. We've got a lot of logs to dig through, and we don't have to be right 100% of the time. We can detect these guys being foolish as well. So with that, I think I'll clear the stage for the next guy. Thank you very much.